Hello, Tom Maguire. I've not done a review or a book review at least for quite some time, so it's good to be back. Fully intend to be doing a lot more book reviews, so please stay tuned. Please keep liking and subscribing. Certainly haven't gone away. I'm absolutely loving my reading, loving it loads, just haven't really had the time to do many reviews recently. I've also been reading quite a lot of classic literature as well, so books that I wouldn't particularly want to review because they've kind of been reviewed to death and you kind of all know that they're fantastic classics, so you don't really kind of need my opinion too much on them. So I tend to do reviews more when I read something a bit more modern, personal development type stuff. The book I'm reviewing today is Who Wrestle with God by the great Jordan Peterson. Anyone who subscribes to this channel will know that I quite like Jordan Peterson. I mention him from time to time, relating some of his ideas to some of the books that I've read. This book, I'm going to talk about what I liked and what I didn't like quite so much. How it isn't, I'm not going to be a fanboy about it and tell you how it's absolutely amazing, because I don't think it was amazing. I don't think it's his best work necessarily, but it's still probably worth giving a go. So yeah. So I think Jordan Peterson, I've read both of his first books, so 12 Rules for Life, and then the second one, 12 More Rules for Life. Enjoyed both of those, got a lot of good takeaways from both those books, as I've said before. This one, Who Wrestle with God, I think it's really quite topical at the minute. I think Jordan Peterson's always quite topical, isn't he? Whatever's going on in the world politically and what have you. You know, we've got Trump back in office. We've got the UK not doing quite so well with the Labour government. We've got Canada and all the stuff that's shifting over there. And obviously Jordan Peterson is from Canada himself, so he's always got something to say about that. I think his study of the Bible, his talks that he gives about God, morals and ethics and the things we should do and can do to kind of lead better lives. I think it's all really important stuff. You don't necessarily have to agree with him in everything. I don't necessarily agree with absolutely everything he says. I generally like most of the stuff he says, to be fair, and relate to it in some way or another. And I think he's a very powerful force for good. I don't really understand the people who dislike him passionately. I find it a little bit strange. I tend to think those people are the sort of people who've maybe heard a couple of sound bites here and there and just assume that he's some kind of right-wing Nazi, which simply isn't the case whatsoever. If you listen to him and read him properly, you'll understand that he's a bit more complicated and nuanced than that. He's certainly not a Nazi in any way whatsoever. But this book, I found it a little bit dull, if I'm honest, personally, simply because I've heard so much of what he says in it already just by listening to his lectures, his talks, his discussions with people, his interviews. So he's already talked about most of the things that he talks about in this book, or he writes in this book. And for that reason, I didn't get a hell of a lot out of it. It felt as though I was just listening to an even more in-depth, kind of longer talk by Jordan Peterson, which inevitably isn't going to be as interesting or as gratifying or instantly gratifying, to be fair. When you listen to a half-hour interview or an hour interview, that goes by in no time, and you've got two people to a certain extent, although Jordan usually holds court pretty well, but he still lets the other person in from time to time. And it's more interesting, it's easier to digest and take in, isn't it? It's a bit more of an instant gratification thing, whereas this is obviously quite a long book, and he is talking the whole time, so it takes a bit more effort and energy to get through it. But yeah, I think if you're into, or you're interested in the Bible, and you are interested in personal development, interested in becoming a better person, it's definitely worth a go, this. It takes a bit of energy and a bit of concentration, but it's definitely worth a go. Some of the stuff that he talks about, of course, is very complicated, and you can be quite snooty about it and say that, you know, it goes over most people's heads, but I don't know, it depends. I think there are different levels, aren't there, of what he's talking about. I like to think I take in most of what he says. There are some interviews and things that he's done recently that are a lot more complicated, though, and I would like to think he's going to go back to where he was before a little bit in terms of being a bit more digestible and a bit more personal development focused, if that makes sense. So when I started getting into personal development, I listened to Jim Rohn quite a lot, Anthony Robbins, people like that. Loved all that. Quickly got into Jordan Peterson as well, and he was I almost felt as though he'd been kind of influenced by someone like Jim Rohn in a way. He's obviously very different and has his own style, but the message is quite kind of similar. So yeah, I would recommend this book if you're into Jordan Peterson, but I would also say that I think he's going to probably come up with something that's a bit more accessible to the general public, if that makes sense, at some point soon. I think he's still full of very interesting ideas. He's very worth listening to and considering. But yeah, not my favourite of his, I would say. But yeah, worth a listen. I need to try to almost not be too seduced by these podcasts and interviews and things, because they're a lot easier, aren't they, to listen to, like I say, than getting through a whole book. But there's something very satisfying about listening to a whole book, I think. So yeah, stay tuned. Please keep liking and subscribing. It's always appreciated. I will be doing some more reviews very soon. Cheers. Bye.